Welcome back to Filling in the History. I believe this is, what is this, episode 5 now? I'm the amateur historian. Welcome back. I hope you are enjoying these little podcasts that I'm doing. Today we're going to be talking about three sections of the Doctrine and Covenants and a lot of the history surrounding that. These were pretty critical moments in the early church history, and especially to the publication of the Book of Mormon. And then so we're going to be talking about Section 3, Section 4, Section 5, as it is in the Latter-day Saint Scripture. And we're going to be skipping Section 10, which actually used to be right after Section 3 anyway. We're going to skip that. And then at the end, because there was such a hullabaloo about gold plates and publication of the Book of Mormon, the last part of this is going to be a little anecdotal again, just kind of stories that we found from the royal I found from the Joseph Smith papers about hiding the golden plates and a lot of the exertions people took to try to find them. Some pretty interesting things. And again, maybe a little bit more anecdotal or opinion based on those. But as far as the first three, some very interesting things that have been found. Quite a lot in the first part, because we're going to be leading up to a couple of negative sections of the Doctrine and Covenants where Joseph Smith, Martin Harris gets chewed out for some of the mistakes that they made and the promises that they broke. So strap in for some papers action. Anyway, so yeah, here we go. So what we're going to be talking about today is what is now known as Section 3 of the Doctrine and Covenants. And for those of you who may not know, Section 1 was a preface. We've done an episode on that. Section 1 was a preface given way into 1830. And that was an intentional thing. As it's stated, the Lord is sort of telling everybody like, hey, we need to have a preface to the Doctrine and Covenants, and so I want you to kind of put this at the beginning, so it's not in chronological order. Section 2, as Latter-day Saints have it, is actually just an excerpt from the Joseph Smith history, from the Pearl of Great Price, or as we like to call it, Draft 2 of the manuscript history of the church. And that one is another alternative translation to the last scripture of Malachi, as was given by the angel Moroni when he came the first time to see Joseph Smith and let him know he's about to do a major project. So this one, Section 3, it just kind of goes downhill. And there's a couple of pretty strenuous things that happen. So a lot of personal things here that I think are important to note. But we're just going to back up to what led us to Section 3. So when we last left off, Martin Harris, who was a huge believer, at that point he'd given Joseph Smith and Emma $50 because they just got married and they were moving to another home, and he was just trying to help them out with their travel. And at that point, Joseph had just barely gotten the plates. And so Martin Harris knew where they were going, and he would go down, and he got some characters so that he could try to show to his wife, which we'll get into today, his wife and his family, which are interesting people, trying to prove to them and others, which is, I think, a legitimate thing. Like, are these things real? Is this kid just making this stuff up and all this kind of stuff? So he goes to Charles Anthony, goes to a couple of other people and says, can you verify these? And they all do. Charles doesn't really take it too well and tears up his certificate. But anyway, so that's where we are now. So Martin's done that. He's kind of verified in a way because he had other people that sort of helped him verify that the characters were legitimate. And now he's back. And now we're translating. And there's a couple of things that are interesting about this. We're going to get into what is called the Book of Lehi. And where I am pulling that from is actually from the original preface of the Book of Mormon, meaning that this was very widely canonized and put out. So the preface to the Book of Mormon, the 1830 edition of the Book of Mormon, talks about and names this as the Book of Lehi. What we find is in a footnote of Histories Volume 1, that Emma Smith helped with the translation, which I think a lot of people know. Martin Harris helped with a little bit of the translation, which we also know. But there's also Reuben Hale, which is Emma's brother. So there you go. Emma Smith, Reuben Hale, Martin Harris translated part of this Book of Lehi. So Martin says, man, I really want to take these pages that we've done. There was about 116 at that point. So they've done a lot of work. That's a lot of work. And a lot of what I've seen and what I would suspect, and nobody knows, but these pages were also kind of long. If you read from the original manuscript of the Book of Mormon, they had at least in the printed volume, they had to basically show you one half of the page, and then you flip over the page, and the last portion of it is there because the pages were long. So my suspicion is that it was a lot of words. It was a lot of work that they had already done. So Martin comes to him and he says, "Hey, can I take these to show my family, get them off my back a little bit?" And the answer is no twice. So he goes and he asks, and the answer is no. And then he goes again, and he's like, no. And he's like, really, truly, like, can you please ask the Lord? And Joseph is asking through the Urim and Thummim. And so then we get this, which is, again, from Joseph Smith's history. I believe this is part of draft 2. So sometime after Mr. Harris had began to write for me, he began to tease me to give him liberty to carry the writings home and shew them, and desired of me that I would inquire of the Lord through the Urim and Thummim, if he might not do so. I did inquire, and the answer was that he must not. However, he was not satisfied with this answer and desired that I should inquire again. I did so, and the answer was as before. Still he could not be contented, but insisted that I should inquire once more. After much solicitation, I again inquired of the Lord, and permission was granted him to have the writings on certain conditions, which were that he shew them only to his brother, Preserved Harris, great name, his own wife, whose name is Lucy Harris, his father, Nathan Harris, and his mother, Rhoda Lapham Harris, and Mrs. Cobb, which is apparently a sister to his wife. So that's out of draft 2. And then he puts him under a covenant. And in the covenant, it says, in accordance with this last answer, I required of him that he should bind himself in a covenant to me, in the most solemn manner, that he could not do otherwise than had been directed. He did so. He bound himself as I required of him, took the writings, and went his way. Joseph goes his way as well. And what we find here, which is interesting, is apparently, and I'll be quoting this a little later on, but apparently because he had asked and got no's and asked again and got a yes, the Lord actually takes the Urim and Thummim away from Joseph Smith at this point. And it's very parental. I don't know. I have kids, and maybe I'm thinking too much about this, but it's just like, fine. The answer is yes. Now give me the Urim and Thummim back. You're bugging me. So, which is what I would have done. Anyway, so Joseph gets the Urim and Thummim taken away from him. So he kind of stops. It's one of the reasons why he stops. The other reason why he stops is actually quite sad. So draft 2 says this. It says, in the meantime, while Martin Harris was gone with the writings, I went to visit my father's family in Manchester. I continued there for a short season and then returned to my place in Pennsylvania. That's one. Documents Volume 1 from the Joseph Smith Papers, the historical introduction to, again, what we now consider Doctrine and Covenants, Section 3, gives a very different description of what happened there. And it says, with the manuscript in hand, Harris left for New York, apparently on the 14th of June. On the 15th of June, the next day, Emma Smith gave birth to a son who was either stillborn or died shortly after birth. For nearly 3 weeks, Joseph Smith cared for Emma, who, in Lucy Mack Smith's words, felt, quote, to tremble upon the verge of the silent home of her infant. As Emma began to recover in early July, she encouraged Joseph Smith to repair to Palmyra for the purpose of learning the cause of Mr. Harris's absence as well as silence. Shortly after Joseph Smith arrived at his parents' home near Palmyra, he learned that Harris had lost the manuscript. Lucy Mack Smith wrote that, quote, sobs and groans filled the house, with Joseph Smith, quote, weeping and grieving like a tender infant. He and his family soon parted with heavy hearts, and Joseph Smith returned to Pennsylvania. A footnote to this introduction also states that Sophia Lewis reportedly said that she was present at the birth and that the baby was stillborn. Lucy Mack Smith, not present at the birth, wrote that the baby was, quote, very soon snatched from her or Emma's arms and borne aloft to the world of spirits. Although the birth and death of this baby are recorded in Joseph Smith's family Bible under the name of Alvin Smith, this information was recorded in the Bible decades after the event by someone other than Joseph Smith or Emma. The baby's gravestone does not give a name, but reads, an infant son to Joseph and Emma Smith. So if that being true, there are accounts that Joseph Smith was heavily grieving Alvin when he went with his father to go find an old silver mine, which is where he met Emma Hale, and they eventually got married. And there are some stories and some indications that he was sort of, and it sounds bad, I hope not to make it sound bad, but kind of using his marriage to sort of move on from Alvin's death and how much that meant to him. And so the fact that his firstborn son would or could have been named Alvin, and maybe it wasn't, I think is very touching and very tragic. So that's what happens. So, right, he's got the Urim and Thummim taken away. He's lost his child, and right after that, he loses the 116 pages. So then what we get is, again, from draft 2. Immediately after my return home, I was walking out a little distance when, behold, the former heavenly messenger appeared and handed to me the Urim and Thummim again, for it had been taken away from me in consequence of my having wearied the Lord and asking for the privilege of letting Martin Harris take the writings which he lost by transgression. So that little nugget. And I inquired of the Lord through them and obtained the following revelation, which is section 3, which, again, I kind of quote as negative because it is. It's like, you lost it. You broke a covenant. You can't be doing this, Joseph. Like, I've taken your privileges away, all this kind of stuff, which is negative. But at the beginning of it, as I was reading it again, this is kind of a personal thing for me. It starts out with, like, you know what? The works of God cannot be frustrated. The works of men can, but not the works of God. And so in a sense, there's a bit of a consolation there. And knowing that Joseph had just lost a baby, I think is sort of a merciful thing if we are to believe that this is a revelation from the Lord. So that's what happens. It's kind of, it is to me a little, I hate to kind of insert this here, but like, it is to me a little comical that more or less Moroni shows up, says, hey, Joseph, here's the Urim and Thummim. He takes a look, kind of gets chewed out, and then has to hand it back. It's kind of like, here, oh yeah, hang on, he's right here. Here, take the phone. He gets yelled at, hands it back to, hands the phone back to Moroni and leaves. But maybe that's a little too lighthearted. But yeah, that's basically what happens. He gets the interpreters long enough to get section 3, and then he hands them back, and he still does not translate. So the question then arises. This says walking out a little distance. So he's like maybe away from other people and gets this back is the, I don't know, the impression that I get. Maybe somebody else was with him. We don't have any indication of that. So how did we actually get section 3? Who's actually writing this down? And so a little, again, historical intro from the Joseph Smith papers gives us insight. It is not known when or how the text was committed to paper. Although Joseph Smith may have written it himself, he dictated later revelations to scribes and may have dictated this one to either Emma or her brother Reuben Hale, both of whom served as scribes to Joseph Smith during this time. So, I don't know. Did he walk back in the house, receive revelation, leave again? Did it all happen in one place? We don't know. That's the best we could do from the papers. So what are we talking about? We're talking about losing 116 pages. Now, this story is, in my opinion, rather generously shared. Again, it's in the preface of the Book of Mormon. It is technically the first revelation that we have in the Doctrine and Covenants, is talking about losing these pages. Section 5 that we have now is about losing the pages. Section 10 is about losing the pages. So they're very, in my opinion, there's a kind of a generous amount about, yes, the pages were lost, and, we're getting chewed out about it. Privileges are lost, these kinds of things. Martin Harris is called a wicked man. There's all sorts of stuff. And so, yeah. So what are we talking about here? Well, this story, just to be notable, is not mentioned in the Wentworth letter. It's not mentioned in the Rupp account. Again, the sort of collection of Christian faiths. So the Wentworth and Rupp letters are almost exactly the same, by the way, but just to point that out. Orson Pratt also doesn't point this out in his 30-plus page pamphlet that he puts out there. He has a lot of detail about Moroni and plates, and he kind of skips over the 160 pages being lost in lieu of just kind of describing the story of the Book of Mormon, which, is a good thing to do for when you're proselyting for the church. But Martin Harris breaks the covenant that he made. And then again from draft 2, we get, quote, notwithstanding, however, the great restrictions which he had been laid under, and the solemnity of the covenant which he had made with me, he did shew them to others, and by stratagem they got them away from him. And they never have been recovered or obtained back until this day. And I will echo that. In 2025, to this day, we still don't know where they are. There was I was listening to another podcast, and it was funny because one of the guys was like, it might be in somebody's attic in a shoebox for all we know, which would be like, whoa, like if that ever came out. But anyway, we still don't have them. We have no idea where they went. Never saw them again. The 1832 history, which is, again, Joseph laid his own hand to this one, although not all the words were written by him specifically, but this is from that 1832 history, says this, quote, I commenced translating the characters, and thus the prophecy of Isaiah was fulfilled, which was written in the 29th chapter concerning the book. And this, by the way, a lot of people attach to the Charles Anthony episode when he says, I cannot read a sealed book. Anyway, and it came to pass that after we had translated 116 pages, that he desired to carry them to read to his friends, that peradventure he might convince them of the truth. Therefore I inquired of the Lord, and the Lord said unto me that he must not take them. And I spake unto him, or Martin, the word of the Lord. And he said, inquire again. And I inquired again, and also the third time. And the Lord said unto me, let him go with them, only he shall covenant with me that he would do according to the word of the Lord. Therefore he took them and took his journey unto his friends into Palmyra, Wayne County, and state of New York, and he brake the covenant which he made before the Lord. And the Lord suffered the writings to fall into the hands of wicked men, and Martin was chastened for his transgression, and I also was chastened also for my transgression, for asking the Lord the third time. Wherefore the plates was taken from me by the power of God, and I was not able to obtain them for a season. And it came to pass, after much humility and affliction of soul, I obtained them again. So again, this is a very generalized sense, and they are writing a history, but I would submit that not only the guilt of losing pages and, the death of a child and just all of this stuff, a lot of suffering at this time, pretty severe, pretty intense. So a little bit about the best that I could find anyway. And I'm restricting myself just to the Joseph Smith papers. So I know there's maybe other stories out there, but I'm trying to sort of honor what they did in this series, which is incredible work. But why the nagging? Who is nagging him about this? Well, again, I'm reading. This is 200 years on, and I'm still like kind of nervous about talking about this because you got some catty neighborhood stuff going on in Palmyra right now. Lucy Mack Smith, as I will shortly show you, is not a fan of the other Lucy in this story, who is Lucy Harris. Now, to back it up a little bit, Lucy Harris was born Lucy Harris. She is Martin Harris's first cousin. They get married, and she presents a dowry, which, again, is still a thing, of land. So part of Martin Harris's wealth, he owned over 300 acres of land in Palmyra, and part of that was his, and maybe some of that was inherited. And he also fought in the War of 1812, so I suspect there might have been a pension of land. That's how I know. I'm a son of the American Revolution, and I know that I have a family history that goes back to that. John Thompson specifically was given a pension of land in Virginia, so that's a thing that used to happen. Anyway, but her dowry was well over 100 acres worth of land. And yeah, I'll get back to that in a second. Okay, so let's go back to it. Why the nagging? A little bit about Lucy Mack Smith. This is from, again, just a kind of a historical introduction that we get. And sort of an introduction to Lucy Mack Smith's history. So this is written by editors of the Joseph Smith papers. Quote, Lucy Harris had recently traveled to Harmony to see the plates herself, but left in anger when Joseph Smith would not allow it. Martin and Lucy Harris likely had a troubled marriage prior to the Martin's involvement with Joseph Smith and the translation of the plates. In the spring of 1828, Martin and Lucy finalized a jointure agreement giving Lucy her marital or dower interest. The document by which Martin deeded Lucy's portion of the property to her by way of her brother Peter Harris bears an 1825 date, but was recorded and filed in May of 1828. So just to say, 1825, this is 2 years before Joseph gets the plates. Martin is nowhere near this storyline yet. when they're basically when Lucy is saying, "I want my dowry back. I want my money back," sort of thing. Anyway, since Lucy opposed Martin's involvement in the translation, she may have pressured him into executing this agreement to protect her interests because she feared that he would offer financial support to the translation and printing of the Book of Mormon, which he in fact did. And by the way, this is coming from, you can see this in the Wayne County, New York deed records and some microfilms that they still have. I mean, so they found this. And so, again, to be honest with you, I think this makes a lot of sense. If you're not on board with gold plates and translating a book, and you think part of your money is going to be put towards that, to me, this actually makes some sense. But apparently, they were in process of doing this for years before that. So that really speaks to some serious tension in the marriage. It's basically in our vernacular, I would call it, and I could be wrong. Lawyers out there, let me know. But this looks like a post-nuptial agreement coming from Lucy, or maybe it was coming from Martin. But anyway, they were not in good shape. And so then she says, "Okay, I want you to execute this because you might use my money," which I think is legit. So, let's give her that much. My favorite, though, is Lucy. This is from Lucy Smith's journal. And this is what I like to call, Lucy is not a fan. So, quote, "Joseph desired me to go, and one afternoon as he wished to see him. But this was an errand that I was somewhat disliked, for his wife was a particular sort of woman that was habitually of a very jealous temperament. And being hard of hearing, she was always suspicious of some secret being in agitation that was designedly kept from her hearing on this account. And I would rather not go up unless I could approach her upon the subject before I spoke to him about it. Joseph Smith consented to this, and I went." So Lucy's like, "Don't make me see that woman. She's just a jealous, bitter." She's like, "What was that? You're talking about me behind my back?" Like, ugh. Anyway, Lucy Mack, not a fan. I keep doing this. Lucy Mack. Lucy Mack Smith is not a fan. So anyway, we're going to leave that one alone. I don't want to get involved in that, even though it's 200 years later. I'm not getting involved in that. We get a little more from, again, the 1830 Book of Mormon preface. I'm going to read just a portion of it, but it says to the reader, "As many false reports have been circulated respecting this or the following work, and also many unlawful measures taken by evil designing persons to destroy me and also the work, I would inform you that I translated by the gift and power of God and caused to be written 116 pages, which I took from the book of Lehi," there it is, "which was an account abridged from the plates of Lehi by the hand of Mormon, which said account some person or persons have stolen and kept from me, notwithstanding my utmost exertion to recover it again, and being commanded of the Lord that I should not translate the same over again," and so forth and so on. So what you just saw there was the original handwriting that is from the printer's manuscript that we have. And that's where that preface actually came from. So you can actually read the original handwritings, as you just saw in the Joseph Smith papers. It's photographed, and there it is. And it goes on from there. And so if you don't know, again, the pages were lost. They were never translated again. We have no idea what was in them. We have some inclinations that maybe some clarifying stories. For example, that it might have been a Mormon abridgment of the history leading up to it. As we have it now, where the Book of Mormon starts as sort of a first-person account from Nephi's perspective, and basically Moroni doesn't touch first Nephi, as we call it, second Nephi, Jacob, Enos, Jerem, Omni. None of these are touched by an abridger. You just get it straight up. He basically kind of takes the plates and just puts them in. Whereas all the rest of most of this book is either Moroni's writing an abridgment or writing for himself, and so is Mormon and Moroni kind of doing that work. Anyway, little explanation there. So that is section 3. A lot of drama, a lot of history getting into that. We're going to get a little bit more about Lucy Harris later on. She is a significant figure here. But for our next section, we're going to be talking about section 4, which I feel is a very touching section. We're also going to be talking a little bit about patriarchs and church patriarchs and what they are and what they used to be. So stay tuned. Okay, part 2, which is section 4. So a couple of explanations, and again, I could, conjecture about what this is, but section 4 is out of order here. If you look at the Revelation books, or even the chronology of when these revelations were intended to be given, section 3 is the first one that we have. That is a revelation. And then the next one that we have is section 10. So and I've got my little, this little Book of Commandments here, the original printing of the Revelation Book 1, which was the Book of Commandments, does place it in that order. So it's in the same order that we get. So what it should be, I guess, if you want to think of it that way, is section 3 is giving, then we get section 10, and then we get section 4, and then we get section 5. In the manuscript history of the church, draft 2, which is found in volume 1 of the Joseph Smith papers, also puts them in that order. So if you're reading from the Pearl of Great Price, and I know you do, in the Joseph Smith history, there's going to be these ellipses, and we kind of skip ahead. So the Joseph Smith history does not get into any of these things. And by these things, I mean the lost pages, section 3, section 10, section 4, and section 5. Those are just kind of skipped over in the Pearl of Great Price. I would assume that it's to save space because, again, we have all of these in the Doctrine and Covenants or elsewhere. So the story is not avoided. It's just maybe not repeated in the Joseph Smith history. Again, my conjecture, my opinion. Why section 10 is kind of placed a little further out, I don't know. It could be contextual. It's definitely not chronological. But anyway, section 10 also has to do with these lost pages, and we will get to that in a future episode, but that's what we have for today. So instead of section 10, we're going to skip ahead to section 4, which is actually rather short. And how did we get here? So as far as the paper itself, draft 2, history, manuscript history of the church, says that Joseph Sr. came to visit his son, and that's when he receives the revelation. And that's about it. It's very, very brief. So if you're reading at it, the volume 1 of the history of the church, or even straight from the horse's mouth here from the histories and Joseph Smith papers, there's really not much there. So we go to the historical introduction. So thank you again, editors, for giving us this, which is, when John Whitmer copied this text into Revelation Book 1, he included this heading, and we're talking about section 4. Quote, a revelation to Joseph, the father of the seer. He desired to know what the Lord had for him to do, and this is what he received as follows. Revelation Book 1 initially gave the date of 1828. As an unidentified scribe wrote a 9 over the 8, thus changing the date from 1828 to 1829, apparently correcting a scribal error. So again, that's from the historical introduction of this section. A little more that we get. The copy featured below is a more complete and probably an earlier version than was inscribed in Revelation Book 1, which is missing the page. That includes the final portion of this revelation. The version below is in the handwriting of Edward Partridge and was kept by him. So the earliest extant version of this is not in the Revelation book. And again, if you remember, there is a swath of revelations that's lost. And again, my suspicion, a lot of people's suspicion, is that, they took it out to go print it and then never put it back. It got lost, it got burned, it got wet. Who knows? It's gone. So we actually don't have it in the Revelation books. But what's interesting about this, though, is that it might actually add a little insight into maybe there were some changes and corrections made in the Revelation Book 1. And one of the reasons why whenever there's a revision to a scripture, they usually try to compare as much as they can between versions to see if they can, get the full revelation in there. So anyway, kind of a side note there. So yeah, Edward Partridge kept this. It's in his handwriting. That's what we're reading here. Basically, this is 3 sections that I think folding over time just kind of separated them. But the bottom portion highlighted here is the actual section 4. And this is the earliest possible version of this particular section that we have. Some circumstantial introduction to how the actual revelation was received. We get this, again, from the historical introduction, which is Joseph Knight Sr., another early supporter of Joseph Smith, wrote that Joseph Sr. and Samuel Smith stopped at his home in Colesville, New York, in January of 1829 before going to visit Joseph Smith and Emma Smith. And then, quote, I told him, who's Joseph Smith Sr., they had traveled far enough, Knight wrote, quote, and I would go with my sleigh and take them down to Harmony tomorrow. I went down and found them well, and they were glad to see us. We conversed about many things. In the morning, I gave the old man $50 and Joseph a little money to buy paper to translate. Joseph Smith apparently had not translated since June of 1828, and Knight's provision of paper may have allowed him to resume translation. Within weeks of Knight's visit, Joseph Smith began translating again with Emma, Samuel, and Martin Harris, each acting briefly as scribe. So Samuel Smith, Joseph Smith's brother, who I believe was the first missionary, actually helped translate part of the Book of Mormon. And I find it funny that, how up against the wall are these guys? He's like, well, I'm out of paper, so I can't really do anything. And you got a guy coming basically saying, you've walked long enough. Let's take my car and, 21st century vernacular. And they get down there and he's like, you're out of paper. Here's a little money. Go buy some paper. That's how kind of desperate circumstances they were in, according to this account. We got a couple of footnotes here as well that I love. Footnote 4 from this historical introduction says, additional information was provided in interviews with Emma Smith and David Whitmer conducted in the 1870s and 1880s. Emma identified herself, Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, and her brother Reuben Hale as Book of Mormon scribes. David Whitmer named Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, Emma Smith, Emma's brother Alva Hale, John Whitmer, and Christian Whitmer as scribes who contributed to the 1829 Book of Mormon manuscript. So this is all kind of happening during this time that Joseph Sr. is coming down to visit. A theory, and again, this is sort of a footnote. This may have influenced Joseph Sr. to talk to Oliver Cowdery about the work, which led to Oliver becoming Joseph's scribe. Lucy wrote that although Cowdery had questioned Joseph Sr. about the gold plates, he did not succeed in eliciting any information for a long time. This revelation may have prompted Joseph Sr. to share a sketch of the facts which related to the plates with Cowdery, who became convinced that he had been called of God to assist Joseph Smith as his scribe. So because there was this sort of, hey, you're called to the work and let's get it going and all this kind of stuff, might have sort of induced Joseph Sr. to, kind of open his mouth and share. So maybe a theory. That's just from a footnote. And so on that note, just kind of as a sidebar here, just because I thought it was important, who was in the manuscript that we still have? We have about a third of it. So if you don't know, the manuscript was placed in a cornerstone of the Nauvoo temple and got water damaged. Water seeped in and just turned a lot of the paper to mush. And so we obviously lost 116 pages. But on top of that, the pages that we do have left over, a lot of them are severely damaged. Some of them are fully intact, but yeah, most of it's gone. So there's really not a lot left over. So the question might arise is what is left over and whose hand do we actually get to see? So from the source note of the original manuscript of the Book of Mormon. So if you're going to read the original manuscript yourself, which you can totally do, there's a source note. And what this means is okay, what kind of paper is this on? What kind of ink is it written on? What's the size? They measure the pages. And then they start talking about whose handwriting is it. It says this. We get the handwriting of Oliver Cowdery, John Whitmer, one unidentified scribe, and Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith's hand is on the original that we have still. Then it continues. It says, Emma Smith, Martin Harris, Samuel Smith, Christian Whitmer, and Reuben Hale were reported to have acted as scribes, though their handwriting is not known to be present on the extant portion of the manuscript. Only about 600 pages of text, with a significant number of pages no longer extant, a portion of the original translation lost in summer of 1828, 116 pages, and about 72% of the remaining text lost through damage and custodial dispersal in the 19th and 20th centuries. So the unknown scribe in the Joseph Smith papers, and I'm just going to describe to you how the Joseph Smith papers functions. The unknown scribe, they call scribe 3. I'm guessing because what we have is John Whitmer's handwriting, Oliver Cowdery's handwriting, and then we have unidentified scribe's handwriting. That's why it's scribe 3. So just, I think where that comes from. So scribe 3, by the way, if you want to take a look at it, this is scribe 3's handwriting. And those pages are very well intact. So that's what's interesting, is that of the intact pages, we have no idea whose handwriting this is. So let your mind run wild. It could be Reuben Hale. It could be Christian Whitmer. It could be Samuel Smith. We don't know. We do know what Emma Smith's handwriting looks like, so we don't think it's her, but it could be any one of these people. So that's just kind of fun. Imagine who you will might be there. So scribe 3 does most of First Nephi. He does chapters 4. She goes through chapters 4 through 12 as we have it in our book today. It is a lot of writing. After that, John Whitmer scribes First Nephi 12 through 16. So kind of meaning like what's after that. He does a little scribing before that in First Nephi. And then Oliver Cowdery, from what we have, scribes the rest of it from what we have. And there could have been all sorts of people involved, but those are now lost. So anyway, kind of interesting. There is this portion here, which is Joseph Smith's own hand. Now, from what I can tell, there's a couple of strike-throughs of words that are attributed to Joseph Smith's hand. So, whether or not that's true, I'm not sure how they came up with that, but that's what they attribute it to. But this portion here was actually translated by Joseph Smith. Now, my opinion is, and I'm going to asterisk that big time, there is a section of the Doctrine and Covenants where Oliver Cowdery is pretty bummed out because he wants to translate just like Joseph is. Joseph hands him the spectacles and he does his own thing, and he translates for a little bit and then stops and says, and the Lord's like, don't be mad at me that I treated you this way. Like, my opinion is that you're looking at it. That was the little portion that maybe Oliver did, my opinion. Otherwise, I'm not really sure why Joseph Smith would handwrite that out. So just throwing it out there as kind of an interesting side note. That is not proven at all. There's nothing to that, but my imagination ran wild with that too. So anyway, so if you want to know where Joseph Smith handwriting is, and this is the only place we have it. But there's a lot lost, so it could be, somewhere in an attic in a shoebox. So kind of going back to Oliver Cowdery being a part of this, and again, the theory that Joseph Sr. sort of shared this because of Section 4 being such a positive thing for him. I'm going to throw this out there from Lucy Mack's history. Quote, he had not been in the place long, and this is Oliver Cowdery, until he began to hear about the place from all quarters, and immediately he commenced importuning Mr. Smith, Joseph Sr., upon the subject. He did not succeed in eliciting any information from him for a long time. At length, however, he gained my husband's confidence so far as to get a sketch of the facts which related to the plates. One day, Oliver Cowdery came home from school in quite a lively mood and said, and as soon as he had the opportunity of conversing with Mr. Smith, he told him that he, Oliver, had been in a deep study all day, and it had been put into his heart that he would have the privilege of writing for Joseph. So if you want to connect those dots, Joseph Sr. gets Section 4, goes home, meets this guy, Oliver Cowdery, has a little faith in him, and Oliver Cowdery turns into the guy that baptizes Joseph Smith. He receives the Aaronic priesthood. He translates the Book of Mormon. So you never know what a little positivity can do. And so the section, which is interesting, again, is about being called to the work and about what qualifies you for the work. What's the work? Well, modern church culture has attached the work to missionary work, which is kind of an interesting thing because of Joseph Smith Sr. never served a proselyting mission. Oliver Cowdery did, Joseph Smith, Samuel Smith was the first missionary, Brigham Young. No, not Joseph. So what did Joseph Sr. do? The main thing that he did, and he did a few things, but the main thing that Joseph Smith Sr. did was he was the patriarch to the church, gave patriarchal blessings. In past episodes, I have shared with you the patriarchal blessing of Joseph Smith Jr. and Emma Smith. Their patriarchal blessings are in there, as well as others in the family. We still have copies, I think, of Sophronia's blessing. And this is still something that happens today. So patriarchal blessings still happen. I have one. My wife has one. My mother has one. My grandmother has one. These are kept, I think, since about the 1920s. Copies of patriarchal blessings, which are done on the stake level or the regional level, are actually shared with the church and are kept in the church history library in the archives of the church. These are considered revelations. We no longer have a church patriarch, though. So that has been dispersed to stake patriarchs, which makes a lot of sense. There's people all over the world. I mean, but there used to be a church patriarch. He used to speak in general conference, and he was considered a revelator. And so Joseph Smith Sr. is the first of these. So the last living church patriarch actually died in 2013 during President Thomas S. Monson's tenure as prophet and president of the church. So just as a kind of a side note here again, maybe a little bonus material, Joseph Smith Sr. is the patriarch of the church. He dies. His son Hiram Smith takes it over. father to son. He succeeds Joseph Sr., and then, as you may or may not know, he is shot and killed in 1844. So John Smith, or Joseph Smith's uncle, is called as the third patriarch to the church. Goes to Salt Lake, is that. After that, you have another John Smith, who's actually the son of Hiram Smith. So there's two different John Smiths here. The third patriarch to the, or the second, well, whatever you want to call it, the third patriarch to the church. They used to call Uncle John, actually, as a side note. And then you have John Smith, who is Hiram Smith's son, is the fourth patriarch. Hiram Gibbs, after that, is the fifth patriarch. Joseph Fielding Smith II, not to be confused with Joseph F. or Joseph Fielding, but Joseph Fielding Smith II is the sixth patriarch. And the very last patriarch was Eldred Gee Smith, seventh patriarch, and the last one the church has. So the church calling, the church-wide patriarch, general authority patriarch, was discontinued on the 6th of October in 1979. So that was done in a general conference. And then Patriarch Smith actually dies on the 4th of April, 2013. So he was 106 years old. And here's a picture of him with President Monson giving him a visit shortly before he died. So kind of fun. This is, again, something that we no longer do. He was made an emeritus patriarch at this point, an emeritus general authority, which is a very, very big thing that we do. You're made an emeritus 70. And as a side note to this too, just church culture and how church operates, certain callings and offices of the priesthood are actually permanent. So if you're ever called as a bishop, you're a bishop for the rest of your life, even though you might not be. You're kind of emeritus. You're not actually acting with keys for that calling. A 70 is a permanent calling. A patriarch is a permanent calling. Apostle is a permanent calling. You are never sort of released from these things. Being a president of something, you are released from. But so this man was the church patriarch, technically speaking, until the day he died. So that's section 4, a little bit about, this kind of popular missionary scripture, which quite frankly is not technically a missionary scripture, but it is big on, like, if you've been called to the work of the Lord in the kingdom of God, these are the things that qualify you, and something that is very used today in church culture. So in our next section, we're going to be talking about section 5 and a little bit about the exertions taken to save these plates from evil designing persons. So stay tuned for next part 3. Welcome back. This is part 3. We're talking about section 5 as we have it in today's Latter-day Saint scripture. And a little trivia here. This is the earliest possible scrap of paper that we have that is called a revelation from Joseph Smith. So all the other stuff has sort of gone the wayside. But this is kind of the OGest version that we can get. This predates the Revelation Book 1 version that we have. So most of the sections that we have, are kind of the earliest versions of it is in Revelation Book 1. And I correct myself because section 5 is actually missing from Revelation Book 1. So, but this document has been carbon dated to, or I'm making that word up. I'm sorry, just anecdotally, but dated to actually be a predecessor to Revelation Book 1. So it's the earliest one that we have. And it is found in what is called the Newell K. Whitney Papers. So according to the source note for this, which is actually in Documents, Volume 1. So we're getting into the documents now. And that's what the Documents series is about in the Joseph Smith Papers, is any other scrap of paper that doesn't fall into these volumes or books or histories or whatever, journals. That's what we get. So we get a lot from this. And again, big thank you to the editors of the Joseph Smith Papers for doing this for us. But this is what they say. This document is part of a collection of revelations found within the Newell K. Whitney Papers, which comprise 3 different groups of material. Early Mormon material, largely relating to the finances of the church. Super exciting. Newell K. Whitney personal papers and Whitney family papers. The Whitney papers include 19 manuscript revelations. The dates of the majority of the revelations indicate that Whitney, likely in his role as bishop of the church, received and retained copies of revelations from mid-1831 through late 1833. And if you recall, the Book of Commandments was published in 1833. So that's a little bit about paper. This is This document is in Oliver Cowdery's handwriting, which is kind of fun. And continued on that source note, and just to kind of show, again, I'm kind of bragging about, I don't know a lot of these people, I know a few of them, but I'm kind of bragging about the lengths and the science and the forensics that they went into to verify these documents. They deserve a lot of praise for this. So we get this. All extant versions of this revelation that bear a date have it as March 1829. Although the featured version gives no explicit date of creation, this is what I love. Oliver Cowdery's handwriting provides a clue to the dating. This document appears to provide one of only two known samples of Cowdery's early stylized or formalized handwriting. The other is a 6th of April 1829 agreement between Joseph Smith and his father-in-law Isaac Hale. And by the way, that was to buy a farm. Once Cowdery again began dictation from Joseph Smith of the Book of Mormon translation, his handwriting evolved into the style that characterized his handwriting for the remainder of his life. If, as the similarities of handwriting style would suggest, this copy of the revelation was created around the same time as the above-mentioned agreement, the document would have been created circa April 1829. This creation date would make this the earliest extant version of any revelation text dictated by Joseph Smith. So the forensics of the style of this guy's handwriting, that is how deep they have gotten into this. And I believe that I would probably make a shout out specifically to Royal Skousen, who has done, I believe it's called the critical approach to the manuscript of the original Book of Mormon manuscript and the printer's manuscript of the Book of Mormon. So he is one of the main editors for a lot of the Book of Mormon manuscript stuff that we have. So again, the publisher's edition, or what am I saying here? The original manuscript as well as the printer's manuscript, publisher's manuscript, whatever you want to call it. He was a main instrumental figure in that. So I believe that his expertise probably added to this a lot, is my guess. I don't know the guy, but I definitely admire him. So anyway, a little about the actual paper itself that we have. Introduction to the circumstances of it. All right. So again, draft 2 is very vague. It just says that Joseph received a revelation from Martin Harris, just to put it briefly. Again, you can read that in draft 2. You can read that in History of the Church, Volume 1, if you want to get nuts. The historical introduction, again, that we get, so thank you, editors, is that Joseph Smith had last seen Martin Harris in the summer of 1828 when he traveled to New York and found that Harris had lost the portion of the translation, later referred to as the Book of Lehi. Joseph Smith returned to Harmony disheartened and without Harris, his scribe. He did not go immediately to translating, but went to laboring on the small farm he had purchased from his father-in-law, Isaac Hale. That's where that agreement comes from that Oliver Cowdery scribed. There is no indication that Joseph Smith and Harris meet again until March of 1829. So summer of 1828 to March of 1829. That's a long absence. And that's only because Harris traveled to Harmony to see him. So yeah, this is Oliver Cowdery's handwriting and the signatures of Isaac Hale and Joseph Smith. So that's the farm. Lucy Harris starts getting into some stuff. So to kind of explain, it says in this revelation, Martin Harris, because you desire a witness. Well, what is he talking about? Well, again, we get some stuff about Lucy Harris again here. And this is, again, from an introduction here. According to Lucy Mack Smith, Harris's wife, also named Lucy, played a central role in generating this opposition to Joseph Smith's work. She, quote, mounted her horse and flew through the neighborhood like a dark spirit from house to house, making diligent inquiry at every house for miles where she had the least hope of gleaning anything that would subserve her purpose. This is from Lucy Mack Smith's history. Again, I don't think Lucy Mack was a fan. Anyway, Lucy Harris sought to prove that Joseph Smith had pretended to have gold plates, quote, for the express purpose of obtaining money from those who might be so incredulous as to believe him, and entered a complaint before a magistrate at Lyons, which is in New York State. It was in the midst of these difficulties that Harris traveled to Harmony to see Joseph Smith. According to the Revelations heading in the 1833 Book of Commandments, quote, Martin desired of the Lord to know whether Joseph had in his possession the record of the Nephites, unquote. Emma Smith's father, Isaac Hale, reported that Harris hoped to gain a greater witness of the plates. So in this revelation, we hear about three witnesses. Basically, the Lord says to him, like, look, I'm going to do it my way. And my way is that you're going to have three witnesses. And that's what we do have. We have a three witnesses page published in every single Book of Mormon back to 1830. We also have a testimony of 8 witnesses. But in this revelation, he's talking about by the mouth of 2 or 3, which is, that goes back to, the Old Testament. And there's these potential lawsuits. So Martin also hears, so the revelation also warned that Joseph Smith, that, quote, there were many that lie in wait to destroy thee, perhaps an allusion to those preparing a lawsuit against Joseph Smith, and declared that the sword of justice hung above the people of that generation, and that if they would persist in the hardness of their hearts, the time cometh that it must soon fall upon them. The revelation asserted that the book's authenticity would be evidenced primarily by its message, not by the plates. If the people would not believe the translation, they would not believe even if Joseph Smith, quote, would show them all things. Again, that's from the historical introduction. So many thanks to those who put that together. A footnote to this is Martin Harris later stated that a man named Rogers accompanied him on the journey to Harmony. Unknown to Harris at the time, Rogers had plotted with Martin's wife, Lucy Harris, that he would cut off the covering of the plates with his knife when Joseph Smith displayed them. No other known sources mentions this scheme or provides evidence that Rogers followed through with it. Rogers cannot be positively identified. There was a Joseph Rogers living near Manchester in Phelpstown who later gave a negative account about the Smiths and claimed to have affidavits just demonstrating that they were thieves. So the editors of the Joseph Smith papers did look into this, and I love that the title of the book that they found was called Naked Truths About Mormonism. So there's a naked truth for you. Apparently there was some guy who was actually plotting, like Lucy Harris would not let this thing go. Actually, apparently paid a guy or hired a guy to like go down there with a knife and do whatever he could to get those plates out of Joseph's hands. There you go. Lucy Mack, from her history, talks about this trial. That this when they say you're seeking a greater witness, and there was people like actually they had witnesses and everything. So according to, again, Lucy Mack Smith's history, according to hers, she says, quote, I will now relate the proceedings of the court. After the setting of the same, the witness were sworn in. The first witness testified that Joseph Smith told him that the box which he had contained nothing but sand, and he only said it was gold plates to deceive the people. Second witness swore that Joseph Smith told upon a certain occasion that it was nothing but a box of lead, and he was determined to use it as he saw fit. Third witness declared under oath that he inquired of Joseph Smith what he had in that box, and Joseph said to him that there was nothing in the box, saying, I've made fools of the whole of you, and all I want is to get Martin Harris's money away from him. Witness also stated that Joseph had already got $200 or $300 from Martin by his persuasion. Now, the only thing that we ever know about is the $50 that Martin gave him and Emma when they moved. But anyway, so those are your three conflicting accounts, quite frankly. But that's, again, according to Lucy Mack Smith's history. So given it that. On the stage back home, and this actually comes from, and just to let you know, again, how much work was put into the Joseph Smith papers. This comes from a microfilm from the State Historical Society of Wisconsin. How random. I mean, how did you find this? Anyway, well done. Find this, basically, as Martin's coming back from receiving this revelation. We get this, quote, William S. Sayer, I believe I'm saying that right, a fellow traveler with Harris on the stagecoach back to Palmyra, recalled that one of the other passengers, quote, did not believe that Joe was capable of composing anything, but that Joe's father was a man of some education and cunning and shrewd, and was duping others through Joe, that they were cheating Harris out of his money. Harris, however, told his fellow passengers that Joseph Smith, quote, had found the gold Bible and stone in which he looked, and was thereby enabled to translate the very ancient characters. So Martin Harris sticking to his guns. Some further insights that we get after the revelation is given. This, again, is from the historical introduction. Isaac Hale reported that he saw Joseph Smith and Harris comparing two manuscript copies of this revelation shortly after it was dictated. Although it is unknown what happened to those copies, this text is the earliest extant copy of any of Joseph Smith's translations, or revelations, Oliver Cowdery possibly created it in April 1829, copying from an earlier manuscript. Another early version of this revelation was copied into Revelation Book 1, but the pages that contained it are missing from Revelation Book 1. The editors of the 1833 Book of Commandments used Revelation Book 1 as their source, but it is unknown what editing to this revelation was done prior to its publication. The differences between the text featured here and the version of the Book of Commandments demonstrate that Revelation Book 1 may not consistently represent the earliest text of Joseph Smith's revelations. A little, again, kind of forensic research there. I find it very interesting that Isaac Hale is kind of part of this revelatory process because, as has been stated, he's not a fan of this. He did sell his a portion of a farmland to Joseph Smith, who farmed it. Apparently, he was around. Reuben Hale is helping with translation. So it's not just like, oh, I hate you, go away, you took my daughter. No, to me, this is a very understandable story of, it's family, you live together, you make it work. And I find it interesting that Isaac Hale actually saw like revelations being sort of compared and contrasted and all that, so he was kind of involved in it. So I don't think we should be saying anything that the Hales were like evil people or something like that. They obviously seem to be doing what they should as a family. So I think that's notable as well. Anyway, so some about Revelation, or section 5 of Revelation from Joseph Smith, the very earliest one that we have. And I got a little bit more about Lucy Harris being really vehement about this. But again, I don't know if that's Lucy Mack writing things. Again, not going to get in the middle of this, even though it's 200 years old. So yeah, there you go. Section 5, a little insights, hopefully, filling in the history a bit from that section of the Doctrine and Covenants. The next we're going to go to is some of the fun and ridiculous things that they had to do to try to save these plates from being stolen by other people. A lot of this next part is going to be Lucy Mack's history. So stay tuned and join us for that. And we're going to get some fun little insights into how crazy people got about these gold plates. Okay, and welcome to part 4, which is what I'm calling hiding the plates. This is a lot of anecdotal stuff. Again, I'm just trying to give you some extra stories, maybe some opinions. So take it the way you want to take it. This is the early histories, some sort of side notes, some other podcasts that I've gleaned from to maybe fill in about some of this stuff, because we're not really going to get into it too much as we move forward. Our next episodes are going to be a lot more about the translation process, Oliver Cowdery, so forth and so on. Anyway, we get something here from Lucy Mack Smith's history. So once people knew that there were these gold plates, they wanted them for money. They wanted them to prove that Joseph was a fraud. They wanted them for whatever reason they wanted them. And again, I think it's very legitimate that people would be like, no, show us the plates. Like, you say you have them, show them to us. Like, I think it's a legitimate thing to ask. And you can go ask the creators of South Park. They did a whole episode about this, which is pretty funny. The only thing I would disagree with Matt and Trey about on their depiction would be that they keep saying, Lucy Harris, smart, Martin Harris, dumb. Lucy Harris kind of got a little wacky too. So anyway, everybody was kind of in a frenzy over this whole thing. So enough about South Park. Let's move on to the Joseph Smith papers. So a little bit about a man named Willard Chase. And this is a name that you may or may not have heard before, but this shows up in Lucy Mack's history. And you're going to see this kind of tie into a couple of other stories that I've gleaned as well. So here you go, Lucy Mack Smith's history. Quote, one Willard Chase, a Methodist class leader at their head, and that was the most ridiculous. So I love it how she calls him ridiculous. They had sent for a conjurer to come 60 miles to divine the place where the record was deposited by magic art. We were apprehensive that the plates were taken out, and so the plates were taken out and secreted somewhere, And we were somewhat uneasy lest they might, like Moses, who was hid in the bulrushes, be discovered by our enemies. So, because they think Joseph has the devil, they go get a conjurer from 60 miles away to find the plates for them. And it gets pretty crazy after that. What I find interesting, and I'm trying to do this in order, so this may not make a lot of sense, but this is the order in which we get them from the Joseph Smith papers, from Lucy Mack's history, is we start talking about seer stones. So this conjurer also has a stone, and also something that's interesting here, and I'm not sure who this is, but there is a daughter who has a seer stone, and Joseph uses that seer stone to find the seer stone that is used to translate the Book of Mormon. And what I found interesting, because I was looking, and one of the reasons why I found this funny, is because I was looking through just Google. I was just Googling this whole idea. And I found this. Somebody is asking that thinks that Mormonism was based on a stolen rock. And that rock needs to be returned back to the Harris family. I'm not sure where they got that from. The best that I could come up with was that there was this is from the Follow Him podcast. I'm going to quote somebody else here for a second. They're talking about there's a court case against Joseph Smith. And let me see if I can find it. There was a girl in Palmyra named Sally Chase who had a seer stone herself. And I asked if I could look at her seer stone. When I looked at her seer stone, I saw this seer stone by a river next to Lake Erie. I asked permission for my parents if I could go and get it, and they said yes. So I traveled to Lake Erie, and I found it right where I had seen it in Sally Chase's stone. I polished it off, put it at the bottom of a hat, and looked at it, and I could see anything. And so, again, thank you to the Follow Him podcast. Apparently, that's from a court transcript. But this whole idea of seer stones and conjurers, this was not like uncommon. So I guess the fact that he found it in a well and just kind of stole it is one way to look at it. The other one is that, he borrowed somebody's seer stone, gave it back, and he was able to use that to kind of look under the earth, apparently upwards to like 10 feet under the earth, which is why he went looking for an old silver mine. And he could find these objects, and that's how he found the seer stone that we have today, and that was published when they put out the printer's manuscript of the Book of Mormon. So anyway, it's kind of part of the culture back then. So I'm gonna leave off that and kind of return here. So another one that I found really interesting during this time. So the plates are there. People are getting conjurers. There's some accusations that Joseph Smith had stolen things from Sally Chase. And then we get to this, and I'm sorry if this is timeline's all over, but this is just the order in which they gave it. So here's another one from Lucy's history, Joseph Smith's mother's history. Joseph kept the Urim and Thummim constantly about his person, and he could, by this means, ascertain at any moment whether or if the plates were in danger. Never heard that one before. I don't know if they buzzed or lit up, or if he just kept looking at them over and over again, but that's how he would find out if they were in danger. And because there's a lot of stories about him like bursting into the house and being like, "There's a mob coming" or something like that, and he was right, and he would move the plate somewhere else and so forth. So one story that's kind of fun, and just kind of as a side note, I was actually a performer in this film. So if you've ever seen the Work in the Glory movie, the first Work in the Glory movie, they actually depict this. So if you ever want to watch it, this is actually filmed there. And it gets kind of crazy. And I was able to corroborate this through a comic book that the church has put out, which I didn't know about. Or maybe I should say a graphic novel. Comic book sounds silly, but a graphic novel that they made, I think, for children is my guess. Anyway, so here's from Lucy Mack Smith's history again. So, quote, when Hiram came, Joseph requested that he or him to bring a chest that had a good lock and key and have it here immediately so that it may be ready. Said Joseph, by the time I get home, having left these directions, he went to bring the record which he had deposited in the cavity of a birch log 3 miles distant, and covered it with the bark of the same. He took the plates from their place and, wrapping them in his linen frock, put them under his arm and started for home, or the house. After walking a short distance in the road, he concluded it would be safer to go across through the woods. In that moment, he struck through the timber where there was a large windfall to cross. He had not proceeded far in this direction till upon as he was jumping over the log, a man sprang up and gave him a heavy blow with a gun. Joseph struck and leveled him to the ground and ran at the top of his speed about a half a mile farther. He was met again in precisely the same way. He soon brought this one down and also ran on again. But before he got home, he was accosted the third time, in which a severe stroke with a gun. When he struck the last one, he dislocated his thumb, which, however, he did not notice till he came inside of the house, where he threw himself down in a corner of the fence to recover his breath. And as soon as he could get on, he rose and finished his race for the house, where he arrived altogether speechless from fright and exhaustion after a moment's rest. He said, "Mother, tell and send Carlos for father, and Mr. Knight and his friend, and tell them to go and see if they can find some men who have been pursuing me." He then let Carlos go and go tell Hiram to bring the chest. So that's, again, I'm reading from her thing. But he basically gets like hit with the butt of a gun twice that we know of. He punches a guy so hard he dislocates his thumb. In the Work and the Glory film, he apparently like uses the gold plates and like smacks the guy in the head with it, which probably would have killed him. But anyway, it's awesome. Of course, the Steed family is involved in that. But anyway, I don't want to hawk that movie too much, but it's awesome. Anyway, so yeah, a dislocated thumb. And from this graphic novel, you can see in this, like, whatever, second panel down, third panel down, that it talks about Joseph having his thumb dislocated. So I looked into that. Lucy Mack Smith's history, hard to say, says this. He went out and related his adventure to his father and Mr. Knight, who had come back from their scouting expedition, right, to see if they could find the guys, without seeing anyone. He showed his thumb again, saying, "I must stop talking, Father, and get you to put my thumb in place, for it is very painful." So when this was done, when Joseph Sr. snaps the guy's thumb back into place again, he related to our guests the whole history of the record, which interested them very much, and listened and believed all that was told them. So he's like, "Can you guys hang on for a second?" Snap, puts his thumb back into place. Ouch. Okay, I'm good. Let me tell you a little bit about the Book of Mormon. Just these people, like the hits keep coming, literally keep coming. So that's one of the ways that he tried to save the plates, is they actually like attacked him. They got a conjurer to come and find the plates. So one story that we get, again, Lucy Mack's history. She shares a story. This is going forward a little bit, but she says the first thing to be attended to was to secrete the record and breastplate. It was resolved that a portion of the hearth should be taken up, and the plates buried under the same, and the hearth relayed to prevent suspicion. This was carefully and speedily done, and the hearth was scarcely laid down when a large company of men came rushing up to the house armed with guns. Joseph threw the door open, and taking a hint from the stratagem of his grandfather Mack, or Solomon Mack Sr., he hallooed as if he had a legion at his command, giving the word of command with great importance, and in a tone like, I'm not sure what this is, stentor at the same time. The males that belonged to the house, from the father down to little Carlos, or Don Carlos Smith, ran out with such vehemence upon the men that they thought it best to give leg, bail, while they were able, and fled, and were pursued by our little Spartan band away into the woods and dispersed themselves to their several homes. Again, this is Lucy Mack's history, but I kind of hope this is true, because it's like, hey guys, go get them. And like, this little kid is running as well as all these other guys, and they're basically faking that there's an army protecting them, and these guys get scared and bail. I just find that funny. So anyway, that's Lucy Mack's story. We then get another one. A little further on, he says, we had but few days' rest, however, for Joseph soon received another intimation, maybe from the Urim and Thummim on his person, we don't know, of the approach of a mob and the necessity of removing the record and breastplate again from its hiding place. He took it, or them, up and carried it, or them, out to a copper shop across the road, and took them out of the box, and after wrapping them carefully in cloths, laid them away in the midst of a quantity of flax, which was stowed in the shop loft. He then nailed up the box as before and tore up the floor and put the box under it. As soon as it was dark, the mob came on and ransacked the place, but it did not come into the house. After making a satisfactory research, they went away the next morning. So the next morning, we found the floor of the copper shop taken up and the wooden box which was put under it split into pieces. And in a few days, we learned the cause of this last move and why their curiosity led them in. This direction, a young woman who was sister to Willard Chase, maybe this is Sally Chase, we don't know, had found a green glass. And by looking through, she could see many wonderful things. And among the rest of her discoveries, she said she had found out the exact place where Joe Smith kept his gold Bible hid. So in pursuance to her directions, they gathered their forces and laid siege to the copper shop, but went away disappointed. But this did not shake their confidence in Miss Chase, for they still went from place to place by her suggestion, determined to get possession of the object of their research. So, believe it or not, if this history account is true, this woman has a stone that she could see stuff in. How on earth would you know that Joseph went to a copper shop and they tore up the floorboards and busted open this box? So I guess this stone worked because they were super close to finding these plates. You know, whether you believe in that stuff or not, that's the story that we're being told by all these contemporaries. Anyway, apparently, and I love the downplayed language of this. It's like, well, you know, because of all this, we thought it best that we'll move to Harmony, Pennsylvania to do the translation. Okay. So that's what they do. And there's kind of a famous story, you know, and I forget where it falls in the timeline. I've left it out for now, but that Joseph kind of puts it in the bottom of a barrel of beans. And some people are like, hey, you're Joe Smith. You have a gold Bible. And where is it? And he's like, I'll bet it's in that barrel of beans. He's like, well, you're not going to dump this out. And he starts like, you know, slowly moving the beans over. And after a while, they get impatient and leave. So they wind up making it to Harmony. And Oliver Cowdery eventually shows up and serves as the scribe for the majority of the translation, which will be our next episode. So just a little of the wacky stories about that we're told about hiding these plates. So again, this has been Filling in the History. I'm the amateur historian. I hope you've enjoyed this. Share it with your friends if you like it. It's been a lot of work to put these together, but I appreciate the positive feedback that you guys have given. It means a lot. But yeah. Enjoy, and we will see you next week.